It is every police leader's responsibility to not only continually develop their own skills and abilities, but to prepare the next generation of leaders. Retired Captain William Frost helps you meet this task by providing a clear blueprint to follow in his book, Leadership in Law Enforcement. To learn more about his book and other consulting and training he provides, go to www.code33consulting.com. That's code33consulting.com. Have you heard of Able? Able is built by AI engineers in San Francisco, and it takes body cam footage and turns it into police reports, using both visual data and transcripts to gather a full picture of the events. If your agency is still writing reports, then it's time to upgrade and liberate 1/3 of patrol time for more important things, like actual policing. Go to ablepolice.com, that's ABEL police.com to learn more. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. Today I have another special panel. This one is fitness oriented, and it's not just physical fitness. It is fitness in a broader scale. We are talking about physical and mental fitness because they are all synonymous, interconnected, and overlapping. And before I keep rambling on, I'm going to introduce our guests, or I'm going to actually ask you all to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about yourselves. But first off, why don't we start with Anthony? We're going to go alphabetically today.
All right. Well, just give you the bullet points, I guess. 17 years in law enforcement. I've been 15 years on our SWAT team, on our tactical team. I work for, I would say, a larger, like a medium large size department. We got about 500 in the Midwest. I'll just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
that way I don't get in trouble.
That's wise.
Right. So outside that, I have 2 degrees in psychology, and as a part-time / additional job for almost a decade, I ran CrossFit tactical strength. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice, man. And what's your page name? Just so people can dial it up if they're not driving right now.
It's Anthony_Heroic Industries on Instagram.
Yeah, man. It's been exciting to get to know you. We're nerding out a little bit about coming on the show, but also like James Hollis and talking about psychology. That's Jungian psychology for those people that go down those rabbit holes. But also to learn more, I didn't know you're a SWAT guy. That is a very demanding assignment on top of running a business, on top of creating content. And then just a moment ago, learned that you got many little ones that you are somewhat accountable for, little children. So
right.
Good for you, man. And I think that is going to be a couple things. It's going to cement your credibility for those listening to be like, man, I get it. He's super fit and he does all these things. However, I got kids, I got this and that. It's like, okay, well, let's start somewhere. And that's generally the conversations here is like, let's go slow and steady. Let's just recognize where we can build some foundation and some momentum because it's always a work in progress.
Everything is a work in progress. Everything. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for that. And Paige, please, could you tell us a little bit about your background in the first responder and wellness spaces?
Yeah, so I've been in the first responder wellness space for the last 8 years. I'm from Phoenix, so I started working with academies and agencies all across the state of Arizona. Now I work with agencies all across the country. I'm the founder of a company called Firstgevity. So we focus on injury prevention, stress management, nutrition. Prior to this, I was really heavily involved in the yoga space. So I come from that background. I trained professional athletes, and I also trained military in skydiving, which is kind of a little fact.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. We've been connected for a long time, I think, via the space and seeing a lot of positive content that you put out. And finally, this has come to fruition. So I really appreciate you both being on. And Paige, can you tell us where people can find you on the social? And we'll get to all the links later on as well.
Yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is probably the best place. It's just my name.
Yeah.
Paige Arnone, pretty easy. And then on all the other social media, it'll be under Firstgevity. So, but LinkedIn's where to find me for sure if you want to connect with me.
Fantastic. All right. Well, panel. So I gave a couple, kind of nudges on themes, and we kind of bounced some things around. And although this is not super scripted, one theme that we were discussing was like strength, right? Like strength as a concept. And for those that are unfamiliar, either they haven't listened to the other yoga related episodes on this show, or they just perceive yoga being something. Man, yoga's hard. And I just relatively recently did a couples retreat where yoga was every day, usually twice a day. And I want to talk about strength in like the relative sense in some aspect, but also that probably dovetails right into this concept of fitness wellness, right? And I talked about how there's the physical, but also the mental. And if you followed the show or if you listened for quite some time, you recognize and you probably are very well aware of the intersection there. But I did want to get both of your professional and personal insights on that. And so we talk about strength. Who wants to open it up on like kind of this concept of strength and maybe where some people might be a little short-sighted in that, and maybe some nudges as to like how we can think about this for our first responders that are, they need to be not just like strong in what that means, but also they need to be durable. And I know Paige is very well versed in that and in the mobility and injury prevention space as well.
Maybe Anthony can take the floor with the strength stuff to start. We all looked at each other.
Yeah. So, I mean, strength in its base form is like your ability to produce force, right? So, like, yeah, and you can kind of like separate out like the difference between strength and power and that kind of stuff from a training standpoint. But like, just for conversation, I think strength is your ability to produce force against another object, and then the length of time that you can do that, right? So, like, that's one definition. And like we just talked about, it's a work in progress, and it's real easy to use metrics on barbells and stuff like that as like, all right, how strong are you? What is your strength in regards to bench press, back squat, deadlift, like big lifts like that. But that also changes over time. Like, I can't lift as much now as I did playing football in college. Like, that will never happen again. So how do I measure strength, right? So, you can really kind of dig down deep into this too and look at like even Westside Barbell, they have special strengths, right? And the force velocity curve, and you have speed strength, strength speed, all these different pieces of the force velocity curve, which is all strength based. They use those for strength athletes. So it's really a deeper concept than just throwing weight around, and then you dig down further and it's like, well, yoga's hard, right? So being strong in yoga is still strength. It just is applied differently, and in the context of what we're talking about. And then you dive into mental health and being mentally strong and mentally tough, and that's all strength.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for doing the very technical aspect of like strength production and like weightlifting strength, especially with your background, from athletics and CrossFit as well. Paige, what percolates in you right now?
I think the first thing that came to my mind, and you touched on it, Anthony, is this idea of mental strength. And I think that historically in the first responder profession, been this idea that needing wellness or mental health resources equates to weakness. And so really trying to figure out, okay, what does mental resiliency really mean? What is the definition of mental resiliency, and how can we cultivate that, and how can we practice that? And so and to your point of what you said earlier, I try to really relate the mental to the physical, because I think that most people can get on board with the physical. When we start talking about like lifting weight, working out, doing yoga, these really physical things, you can relate to that because everyone has done something physical in their life, right? And so you can get on board with that. It's tangible, it makes sense. If you can relate mental training in the same way that you can physical training, then I think that the perception and how we view mental wellness can change to being weak to super strong. And so when I talk about mental strength and resiliency, it's very similar in the way that you think about physical. When you do hard things physically, you become more resilient and able to do harder things, right? You're training your body to be able to persevere, to push through, to do more things. It's the same thing mentally. The more we can train our brain to do hard things, the more hard things you can do. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you guys at all, but like
Yeah,
that's
no,
how
it
I
does.
think of it, is like the more equipped and the more ready you are for hard things, and the more hard things that you are able to withstand over time. There's lots of things we can do, and you can actually build mental strength through the physical practice, whether that's yoga or going to the gym.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I am tracking, and I think about, being an adolescent male and then going to college, and, a bunch of us are just going to the gym, and half of it was like social hour, let's be real. And then the other half was like, you actually, when you're dedicated, you start getting under some weight and you start moving it. And like literally you see the effects of what your time and effort does. And you see that you're able to move more weight and you're able to move it more times, and then you see changes in your body, you feel change in your body, and byproduct is you get confidence. You have confidence that you are able to do this hard thing, and then at that age especially, you're just trying to be more attractive to who you're attracted to, right? And so there is that byproduct as well, where you get that positive feedback loop. And then so whereas like you're really trying to get this, I think, physical benefit, a lot of times the byproduct is a mental benefit. And so I think that a lot of people can think in those simple terms, whether they were in some better shape in their earlier life or they're in better shape now. Yeah, no, thanks for walking us through that.
Yeah.
What do you think about the intersection there, Anthony? I mean, we're kind of going back and forth. And it feels like a little chicken and egg. I feel like if you ask most people that are in the wellness space, like, hey, how do you address someone's health? What would you start with? Do you have like a kind of a gut response there?
So yeah, I mean, addressing health, right? So where are we at? Where do we want to go? Like, as you as an individual, like where are we at? Are you aware of what your current situation is? And then where would you like to go with it? And depending on that is going to dictate kind of starting points and that kind of stuff. Um, so like from a law enforcement perspective, this is where it's not like I would love to be like, here's the protocols for a tactical professional, but it's especially in law enforcement and fire, like where we are part of civilian populations too. Like we cover like both parts of it. Like we're not just one, we're both, right? We're part of the general population and the specific niche here. So, you know, you have to look at it and say like, all right, are we 50 pounds overweight? Like we're going to have to focus on some different things rather than like, well, I'm 130 pounds and I kind of get pushed around on the street. Right. So like, there's going to be a little bit different of a dynamic for that. Um, but a lot of it starts with like base level, how's your aerobic system? Do we need to add muscle? That's typically what I look at because most people are over dieted, right? So it's like if we just focus on gaining muscle, then it's going to give you all kinds of confidence benefits that you just mentioned, and then and we can address the weight loss in a way that is way less like mentally stressful, because like dieting is not fun. Like cutting is not fun. I'm glad I played sports where I only ever had to worry about gaining and eating more and
Yeah,
that kind of
you
stuff.
didn't wrestle.
Well, I did, but I made sure I was in a weight class that I
Oh,
was
yeah.
like, I don't have to worry about cutting because it
Yeah,
was
you
like
look
my
like a big
second
fella.
sport.
Yeah.
Well, it was a like sport number 2. So like, hey, I'm a football player that happens to wrestle. Like, I really don't care if I don't make weight, just bump me up and I'll see how I do. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, but cutting's, but like, through wrestling, like cutting sucks, man. Like, and if we can change the frame on that, like you don't have to restrict yourself here. We just need to gain some muscle and that'll probably take care of a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, those are good points. And I did not wrestle, for clarification. I have some buddies that did, and they did the whole,
Oh, okay.
multiple sets of sweatsuits and garbage bags and spitting in a bottle and biology and trying to recruit me into that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like it looks
Yeah, because it
pretty,
looks miserable. Why
it
would you
looks
want to do that?
miserable. They're like fading in class. But yeah, you bring up good points, right? Like we talk about like strength, and there's like you're not just like what weight you can move, but also like how strong is your body? Like how robust is it? How durable is it? And generally muscle mass will help that, bone density and these things, so that if we get knocked down, that kind of thing, then, you are a bit more durable. And that's where I'd be curious, Paige, like what what your thoughts are on that, right? You talked about injury prevention certainly before the recording started, not just yoga, but mobility and then wellness. What are some things that you notice as far as like maybe it's chronic injuries that you see in first responders a lot, and then also like the things that you do to aid that and then prevent that?
Yeah. So, and I really liked the point that Anthony made, and I wanted to touch on this a little bit of like, what is the goal? And I think that if you can ask everyone, like, what is the why? Like, what is important to you? Because I think when it comes to wellness as a whole, we're always going to hear, oh, I don't have time, or I'm not motivated, or, whatever excuse or pushback there is. And so if we can sit here and say, okay, what is your why? Why is this important to you? What is the goal that we're trying to achieve? And then we can go from there. And I always say if the why is strong enough, the how becomes easy. And discipline and consistency is always going to trump motivation, period. Like that's motivation's fleeting. It's never going to be something that you're going to wake up, maybe over time if you build the habit, but it's never going to be something where you wake up every day and you want to do it. This is especially true in mobility. When across the board, everyone I talk to in law enforcement is like, man, I need to stretch, but I just don't, or it hurts, or I'm as flexible as a 2x4. And so I can't do it. I get all of the excuses under the sun. But if it's like going back to, okay, well, what is your wellness? Why? Is it that you want longevity? Do you want to be able to be there with your family for the long term? Do you want to reduce injuries? Do you, want to be safe and effective on the streets? Do you want to retire and be able to move? Because the reality is if you don't bend, you break. And the tighter you are and the less mobile you are, the more likely you are to become injured. And so one of the top injuries in first responder profession is lack of mobility. And so how can we integrate that into your routine in a short and effective way? Because you don't have to do an hour-long yoga class for this to be effective. You can do 10 minutes of dynamic mobility. You can do 10, 15 minutes of yoga or passive mobility, and that'll significantly help you. And so what we're looking for is more plasticity and more movement so that when you are going from cold to hot on an on-foot pursuit, you're not pulling a hamstring or whatever it is. So to ask or answer your question about what I see across the board, I mean, we know the top injuries, it's going to be shoulders, backs, knees. And we know that, I mean, in my program, 85% of the people who are on the program are asking for back pain stuff. So backs are a huge thing. And when you think about back pain, there's a lot of different contributors to it. Obviously the weight of your gear, sitting for prolonged periods of time, but really a lot of times it's tight hips and hamstrings. So how can we open up your hips and hamstrings to help alleviate? And then how can we also build more core strength to protect your back? So that's what I'm seeing. But I think that the step one of that is like, why is this important to you? And then we can start to work on the how and the what.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you hit on a lot of things there. And I think that might be very confusing to people that don't have any sort of background or haven't, taken time to learn more about physiology, right? So a lot of times you're absolutely right. Like I can think about so many friends and colleagues and myself that's like lower back or mid back, right? Like these strains and these bumps and bruises, you might have a solid deadlift and then you just pick up something kind of weird asymmetrically and then, you feel this pop or you feel something because you're so fatigued. But all to the point of, oftentimes if you have this pain, and please, I'd love to hear your guys' perspective. But you have this pain, it's not necessarily like right where that occurred. It is like the next joint over, right? So maybe it's, your glutes, like you have underdeveloped glutes, and that's why you have this lower back chronic thing. Is that a bit of what you guys are seeing in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. That's Kelly Starrett. I heard him say this years ago, but just because that's where the rats are eating doesn't mean that's where they live, right?
Mm.
So yeah, I actually had a guy on the SWAT team with me. This was a couple years ago. He was having medial knee pain. And he's like, "Hey, what do you got for knee pain? It hurts here."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, it's probably like, let's start with smashing out and do some soft tissue work on the outside of your quad. Let's stretch your hips." And he was like, "Yeah, but my knee hurts. My knee hurts." And he could not wrap his head around the fact, like, the knee is not the problem. Like, you don't have a mechanical issue with that joint. Like, it's intact. the issue is upstream or downstream. Like, so let's start figuring it out. And he was basically like, nah, I'll just deal with it. I was like, I don't believe you. I was like, okay, fine. But yeah, that's 100%. And with like lower backs and tight hips and stuff like that. And this is what I was kind of mentioning earlier before we started recording about Jill Miller, is that like diaphragm, right? We have so many like issues with our diaphragms because the way, like, sitting like we are now in flexion, probably with duty belt and like turtle shell and all that kind of stuff for hours sometimes, it just compresses everything, and it's like whoever designed this, the gear for police officers was like, how can I destroy these people? Like, this is 100% like what I'm going to do.
All this weight on their hips. It's definitely not going to be balanced.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's like, how can we undo some of that bad time, and understanding that, like, hey, you got to work up and down the chain, it's all connected.
Yeah. And as I kind of posited that, Paige is nodding her head as well, so yeah, Paige, what do you got?
I mean, he said it perfectly. It's all a chain, and it's all interconnected. And so I was shaking my head, yes, because the knee thing comes up so often, and it's true. It's like usually it's either the hip or the ankle. Like you said, it's like above or below. It's usually not the knee itself. And I think obviously the more education, the more people are going to understand that. But even when we're doing mobility stuff all the time, I hear, and I don't know what it is about knees that people are just like, yeah, I'm just going to suck it up. And it's always the knee, but they're just like, oh, it's good. Like, yeah, my knee hurts, but it's good. I'm like, no, that's not good. They're like, my knee's tight. I'm like, your knee's not tight. Your hips are tight. And your knee is twisting because it stopped rotating. Your hip stopped rotating, so your knee is twisting, and now you're having knee pain. And so I think when you can start to understand that everything is interconnected, even just starting at your feet and being able to build muscle in your feet to help with your balance and your coordination, because the muscles in the feet weaken over time through wearing shoes. And then that weakens the ankles, and then it works up to the knees. Like, everything is connected. And so everything he said was spot on. I was like, yep.
Yeah, and I love how you just went there, right? Like, let's start bottom up, right? So like the feet, and we are certainly walking around, we're existing, like it starts at the foundation. And I love it. You've probably heard similar things, both of you, in the kind of content or circles or spheres that you surround yourselves in. But hearing that like shoes are basically like casts for your feet. And there are some people, I'm sure some of our friends and colleagues, that they like live in shoes, right? They like wear shoes inside, they wear shoes outside, maybe they wear slippers, like all the way up until they get into bed. And then what that may do. Do either of you have a strong opinion on that? Like trying to incorporate like periods of being barefoot, especially when a lot of us are wearing boots, and they probably, I mean, there's all types these days, different amounts of flexion, but for a lot of people that are in a more physical job, and maybe they're doing terrain, maybe they're canine, like you want ankle support. And then a lot of the gunk you're going in, you want Gore-Tex, right? So they're going to be thicker, and then they're not going to be super flexible. Any thoughts there from either of you?
I mean, I can jump in a little bit. I do think that it's important to do some things without shoes on. But I also recognize that, like, we're going to wear shoes. Like, it's just going to happen. It comes with your guys' job. It's just life, that we're going to be walking around in shoes. But you start to see things like yoga. We practice without shoes on so that we can strengthen the muscles in our feet, stabilize our ankles. Same thing with jiu-jitsu. You see people doing jiu-jitsu, and it's usually barefoot, and it's the same thing. So I would encourage it. I would even say, like, you can see it in the gym, people taking their shoes off to lift. It gives you more opportunity to stabilize and to ground down. And then it does stabilize and start to strengthen your ankles. So I would suggest it. There's so many times where I'm, teaching a class, and it took a while for people to be really open to taking their shoes off. It's really interesting, especially at an academy level. I don't know what it is. Everyone's worried about their stinky feet or something. But I think if you can get on board with even if it's just socks, just take your shoes off, and then you can start to strengthen. So I suggest it, but I also recognize that it's not reality to be barefoot all the time.
Yeah. I can get behind the self-consciousness, especially wearing boots, right? And like the smell. But like there's ways around that, right? That becomes part of your practice, or you have that kind of environment in your PD, like a gym or something. Then maybe you have a gym bag and it's got some wipes in there, right? You can kind of freshen up and not and be a courtesy to yourself and everyone else. How about you, Anthony? What do you think?
Yeah. So when I started doing CrossFit, that was like 2008. So it was really early on, and those toe shoes were all the rage, right? So like I was like,
gonna say, yeah.
yes, minimal. And then within a month, I think I had such bad tendonitis in my toes I could barely walk. I was like, maybe I'm like, misapplying this, and I totally was. Like, there's a balance to it for sure. But so athletically, like some stuff that I made some notes on while you were talking is like the plantar shock response. Like that's something that's really important to understand athletically, is like your feet hit the ground, right? This is plyometric stuff. Your feet hit the ground and it immediately sends a signal to your brain about what to do. And that's why like trail running is so cool, because every step that you take, it is sending that plantar shock response to your brain and telling you like balance here, shift here, so you don't fall on your face. And when you talk about box jumps and stuff like that, like real plyometric stuff, not like rebounding box jump, that too, but that plantar shock response is always there. So if you are always wearing big bulky shoes, that blunts that plantar shock response. So you're actually putting your ankle, knee, and hip in a vulnerable spot because you're not getting the information from the ground. So that is like something you have to balance out with footwear. Even on the road, like I've worn big thick Danners when I started, and they're just too heavy and they suck.
The Acadias, like those ones you could resole.
Yes, those ones. Then it was like, you have to have these. I was like, all right. And then I get them and I'm like, I hate these. I cannot stand these. And I see dudes running around in tennis shoes and I'm like, that looks closer to what I want. But yeah, so that's one. And then even if you look at sport, right? So if you look at like football, there's still people, and I don't know why they do this, but they spat their shoes. They tape their ankles and then tape and put their shoes on and then tape their shoes up their ankles again. And it's like, well, that's going to limit. It's a literal cast, so you won't roll your ankle, but that movement is going to then be distributed up the chain. So your knee is going to take that. And that's why you spat those shoes too hard, too often, and you're going to blow a knee out. Like that's like, we know that's going to happen. So it's going to collapse the arch, and like, you're going to have to turn that out. And then that's going to unwind like a Thanksgiving, turkey leg. So if you're wearing big ass boots like that all the time, like there's a chance that if you get caught in a weird position, like that's like a spat, so you're going to have no movement in your ankle will be safe, but your knee might blow out. So like there's those considerations too with that. And then the last thing is like, when you talk about movement in the foot, right? So like I coach some high school kids in my son's football team, and it's like back squat. First thing we do, get organized coming out of the rack, get your feet set, organize your feet, wind the system up from the top and the bottom, and then pull yourself into that position rather than letting gravity just like crush you down. So like if you fail to wind those feet up and connect with the ground, just like in yoga where you talk about like grounding, if you don't do that, like the knee won't be as good, your external rotation won't be as good, like nothing is going to be as active as when you wind your foot up.
Yeah. No, I love it. And just to go back on like footwear, I think it goes back to what you both talked about. Like, what is the goal here? And I think that a lot of the audience will resonate with this, because a lot of us are doers, we're movers, we're shakers, we're go. And so definitely not in that era of like CrossFit or like barefoot shoes, which by the way, if you're rocking those are they Vibrams? Like the five-finger toe, like five toe.
Yes.
Like that is an ultimate flex, because I will not wear those. But if you wear those, you don't give an F, and I respect you. Like I see you. I'm not there, and maybe that's the goal at one point, that I'm gonna be an old man like wearing blue jeans, lifting weights with five-finger shoes. But all to say, like, what is the goal, right? And so if the goal is to have some more mobility and strengthen your foot, then what are the activities you do that in, right? Is it to do, maybe some yoga in your house, right? Some balancing stuff, some mobility. You just are maybe more intentional to not wear shoes all the time, between your driveway and your house. However, it doesn't necessarily mean buy the most minimal shoes, as I did, like I'm sure a lot of people did, because you heard it's really good for your feet and it's really good, period. And then you go run a mile or two, and then you can barely walk after that, because you bought these like super thin soled shoes, right? So, but I love the aspect that you should be aware of these things, especially in this day and age where I'm seeing so many, like the shoes are getting taller and taller. I thought like the Skechers shape ups were kind of a joke, and now it's like with Hoka's and all all these things of like, and I get it. If you're an ultra runner like that, it makes sense to me. I don't know. I'm not an ultra runner, but a lot of people are rocking those like all day long, these like 3-inch, soles, and they're not running a lot. They're just walking. And I wonder how much that, weakens, someone's foot with that. And I also appreciate the downstream effects, right? You over, what is that term you use? Like basically overwrapping your ankle.
Yeah, with the spats.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then there is a downstream consequence. And I think it's
Yeah.
wise, like not to paralyze us, but just to help us be aware there is a downstream consequence to like everything. And I've shared before, like when I got really into like, I'll call it very amateur powerlifting because I was just doing it on my own at like a conventional gym, but just trying to get my numbers up. And so I was doing like the wraps and the belt and all this stuff, and I was just stacking weight, but I wasn't competing. And at a certain point, for sure, I was not helping my performance, as a canine handler. Like I was sore and borderline like in a snap as I'm trying to run a track for a couple miles, which is like, that's not the goal. So what is the goal, right? And I appreciate you kind of walking that out. For those that are maybe newer or they kind of want to dip their toe back into like, how do I start a routine and just get more well-rounded, more durable, more maybe less prone to injury? Like I'm kind of want to bounce between you two, and maybe we'll start with like the novice or kind of the entry level. What are some basic things that you think are like necessary, if not daily, maybe weekly things that people could start to incorporate? Paige, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I think, and it's always such a challenging topic because everyone's going to be different on what they're
Mm-hmm.
looking for, like we said. And I always err on the side of like, keep it simple, and just start somewhere. I always say like small changes lead to big impact. So if you can do something one time a week, that's better than no times a week. And then you can, create a habit and more consistency from there. As far as injury prevention, if we're talking in this profession, in the first responder profession, I always say start with some sort of mobility. And it doesn't have to be yoga. It can be passive, dynamic, yoga, whatever, but mobility, 10 minutes. And if you're going to do something before you work out, it's probably better to do something more dynamic. If you're going to do something after you work out, you can do something a little bit more passive. If you're doing it individually, you can do either. But 10 minutes of mobility or yoga once a week to start,
Mm-hmm.
ideally 3 times a week if you can. 10 to 15 minutes, that's going to reduce your risk of injury a significant amount. It's going to improve your mobility, and it's going to reduce your risk of injury by like, I think the stats are saying like 60% by incorporating some sort of mobility training into your routine. So that would be my piece of advice. Obviously, I think yoga has other benefits outside of just the mobility. We're stabilizing, we're also regulating the nervous system at the same time. So it's kind of an all-in-one like trifecta. But if we're thinking about injury prevention, some sort of mobility, at least 1, if not 3 times a week for 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, I love that. And so just to tell the listeners, like, can you explain the difference between dynamic and passive?
Yeah. So dynamic is going to be more of like you're trying to warm yourself up, right? You're doing more of an active mobility routine, if you will. So you're not going to be holding things for long periods of time. Passive is going to be more of like what you think of when you say stretching, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're just like hanging out there for maybe a minute or so and we're going slow and we're holding stationary poses. Dynamic is going to be more of that like functional mobility. I think most people kind of understand what that looks like. A little bit more active rather than just holding things passively.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's really helpful. I think a lot of people can conceptualize that, and especially because it is, I think, a go-to for those that are inexperienced to do a lot of static stretching, right? So before they do their leg routine, right, their leg workout, maybe they are doing like the traditional like butterfly stretch, and they're like literally doing their kicking one leg out straight and bending the other one, and then they're going both legs out. Whereas I have heard and I've seen a lot of and felt a lot of benefit from doing more of that dynamic warm up. Maybe like full mobility squats, like body weight squats before
Right.
going into doing lunges and squats and all that with weights, personally, because I think a lot of the ideology, and maybe Anthony can jump in before he gives his 2 cents, is that you're not really you're not stretching those muscles, because you do want some rigidity when you're doing resistance training. Thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah, you need to. So again, like, what are we training for, right? So if we're training to be a platform athlete or even a CrossFitter to an extent, something like that, then you're going to have a whole lot of rigidity in your system that's necessary, especially with powerlifting, right? If you are not rigid, like, you're just not going to do well, or you're going to get hurt. Now, when you're talking about things that are more athletic, field and court sports, tactical athletes, I would say it kind of fits into that realm. Like, you have to be able to transition from being flexible and pliable into getting stiff and rigid right away. It's a lot more like grappling with that, where you have to be able to move, make shapes, and then transition from one to the other, and then get real rigid before you throw somebody, like stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Paige, what do you got?
I just also wanted to touch on, and maybe you're going to cover this a little bit, especially because obviously the mobility part is kind of my wheelhouse. And I think that we also need to recognize that there is an effective way to do these things, and there's an ineffective way to do these things. And when it comes to first responders and the time constraints, because you guys are so busy, right? It's like we want to do things that are quick and effective. And I think the keyword's effective. Like, you want to make sure that whatever you're dedicating your time to is actually getting you the results that you're looking for. And when we're looking at, because I was just thinking, when you're like, oh, the butterfly and the, kick the leg out, and, yes, those are some things that you can do to stretch for sure. But are we doing these in an effective way that are going to allow you to reach that end goal? Or what I tend to see is putting everything into your back. So when we're looking at like stretching, everyone's like, well, I can't do it, or it's really hard, or I can't touch my toes. And all I see is like these big rounded backs. And I'm like, well, you're never, ever going to get there. All you're doing is putting it into your back. You're exasperating what the issue is already. And so I think that there's a point to be made that whatever it is that you're doing, we want to do it, but we also want to make sure that we're doing it safely and effectively.
Yeah, that's perfect. I was going to ask you, circle back, so this is a great time. Like, what are some of the, I love that you're aware of the audience, right? Like, if you say like, hey, I need you to do 45 minutes, like, everyone stopped listening. They turn the thing off, right? Like, they're not doing it. Especially if we're trying to get them into this type of, methodology or just ideology that they should incorporate little bits, and then build from there. Are there go-to, given the type of like chronic injuries or like the aches and pains that we frequently deal with, as we recognize like the back, right? Like the back side of us, the posterior chain, kind of the go-to things that you would ask people to look at, whether it's looking at your content or YouTube, for what these movements might be.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously going to plug me and the program for sure.
Yeah, please do.
But I think, when it comes to doing these things, in the context of like, again, what is the goal? Like, if you have back pain, then I think that it's important to understand what it is that you need to focus on. And so it starts with that education like we're having now. And we talked about this before, like, it's also not a one size fits all. I think everyone's going to be different in like what is going on with their body. But if someone says back pain, then I'm probably going to say, okay, let's start with opening up your hips and hamstrings and let's see if that helps. Let's also try to build some deep abdominal muscles and engagement in your transverse abdominis to protect your low back and see how that goes. We really are trying to get more of that anterior tilt and that pelvic movement a little bit as well. So I think that it's, again, what's the goal, but then what is the individual going through so that we can address that. But typically if I hear back pain, it's going to be more of that approach. And that's what, we do with the program is try to look at the individual and figure out what we can do. But I think it's more education and understanding, like, where is the starting point?
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. We're going to take a pretty dramatic pivot. And because Anthony's background, football, CrossFit, you're a long-term SWAT officer, you don't look like a slouch. You don't look like you're old enough to have a teenage kid. But yeah, like
Yeah, two.
What's that?
There's two teenagers.
Oh, two. Look at that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, what are some things that for the listeners that want to be that tactical athlete? And I know that phrase gets thrown around a lot, but essentially like you are ready, able, adaptable to do the things that this job may be called on you to do. An average day generally does not call on you to do these things, but we know we're not intending to just show up for an average day. Like we get paid and we have an expectation to do that big thing on that day and train for that day, whether or not it comes. But for someone that is a SWAT member in a pretty good sized agency, I imagine you do get some activity. So, what are some things that come to mind in people looking at their own fitness routine and things that you would encourage them to incorporate on a weekly basis?
Yeah, the biggest thing as far as like, tactical operations for, domestic law enforcement. Um, it's going to be in a bigger kit. You're going to carry more gear. It's just going to, everything is going to be slower. Everything is going to be heavier. Everything is just going to require more of what you're already doing, right? You can't move as quickly. Like you're going to have to, like you're going to be 50 pounds heavier, if not more everywhere you go. And you're going to have to sustain that for long periods of time. So like, it's a lot of moving heavy stuff around, getting it set real quick, and then sitting and waiting, and then you have to explode when you're ready to go. And it's just it's very similar to what we do on the street. Like if you're a road cop, it's very similar in the sense that like the movements and the archetypes and the things are going to look the same, but they're applied in a different fashion. And it's just a little harder and a little longer. And you're going to be tired and it's not going to be a perfect scenario. And you're going to have to perform perfectly because in the event that you're called to take that shot or whatever, like you never know when it's going to be. And there's like zero room for error. It's not like you get to be like, oh yeah, well, I did my best and there's no repercussions. Like it's high risk and you have to be really, really good in terrible situations. So you
Yeah.
kind of got to train for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So on
Does
the
that answer the question? Or
it lays the roadmap for sure. And so what I'm going to ask and follow up is like, what are SWAT? I mean, I know a lot of you guys cross train, you go to different events, and you just see like how other SWAT officers show up. But like, what is a thing that not enough SWAT officers are maybe incorporating into their fitness routines that would help them engage and operate better?
I think focusing on movement, like you look at most SWAT guys and you're like, all right, they definitely will lift weights. Like that's like not a big deal. It's like, and then you can't really like, let's just leave it at that. You have to lift, right? Because everybody's got their own opinions on what and where and how, and this is my split and I do this and like whatever.
Sure.
You can't talk to anybody, which is fine. Like we can optimize everything, but you're lifting weights. Okay, cool. Check. Let's move on. Now, how you're lifting weights and what your movement looks like. This is where, like Paige, I think it kind of flows into what you do, where it's like this is not only training to be strong, but it's training to move well. And if you don't move well under a load, if your movement is dysfunctional, if you're training a dysfunctional movement pattern, it's a fast track to injury in a very short career. That's in sport and in this field too. If your squat is, it looks like an unsupervised high school kid in a weight room trying to impress his buddies and his knees are caving and his back is rounded. And it's like, if that's your squat, like you're going to have a very short career here because, like ego along with other things. But yeah, movement practice. And then depending on because there's no real standard, like our fitness standard is different from, Chicago's and LA's or whatever. Right. There's not enough focus, I don't think, once you get on a SWAT team to maintain the standards that it took to get there. And that's usually body weight movements and aerobic work. Because typically what happens, and this is par for a lot of agencies, not all, but a lot, is you get on a SWAT team and you have to do X amount of pull-ups. You have to run some obstacle course. You have to do an extended, aerobic piece. And then once you get on, you don't really have to do it anymore. And people don't like to mention that, but like if you got on and the standard was 10 pull-ups, then at any point you should be able to do the 10 pull-ups and not only because that's integrity, but it's also like it's going to help you maintain body composition, maintain healthy weight, and maintain like mobility and all those things that nobody likes to train So you got to kind of backdoor the training. That's like getting your vegetables in. Like I can't stand getting them in. So how do we do it in a way that you can kind of like trick your kids into eating it, or like feed the dog the medicine with some cheese, like that kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
do you work that in? Because if you tell a SWAT guy even 10 minutes of yoga, he's probably gonna be like, yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it, right? So like typically,
Hmm.
unless he's trying to pick up a chick at the yoga gym, right? So so um, so yeah, it's how do you work that stuff in the back end, and how do you have integrity with the process that you got there?
Yeah. Yeah, you peeled we're gonna leave the wallpaper there because I think you hit on something that I think most listeners would really resonate with, which is like, why do we have the standard in the first place? And
Oh man,
kudos to the teams that require ongoing thing, but it does go to this conversation that we've had before on the show, and maybe we need to have you back to talk about standards, like just standards, right? Physical standards you test to come in. It's usually not a very high bar just for policing. And then after that, literally after like a couple runs of that test, you're kind of good to go, no matter what may happen to you or what you allowed to happen to you. But we won't go down that rabbit hole. Paige, so after hearing what Anthony shared about being an active officer and SWAT member with all the gear, are there any additional things you'd kind of have those people think about, whether they are in that type of assignment or whether it's bunker gear, as far as adding the weight onto already the susceptible things? Like, how do you address that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I kind of wanted to touch on one thing that you said about SWAT being like, I don't know. It's really interesting because like I've actually found more buy-in from SWAT to do that kind of stuff, because I feel like there's this higher, like there's this idea of like elite performance that's like ingrained in you guys, from a SWAT perspective. And maybe like on your days off, you won't, but I feel like when we like do the in-person stuff, I feel like SWAT is usually like the ones that are like, yeah, let's do it. I don't know. Maybe that's just out here. But I think there's a few things. One, I think that training with gear is helpful. And we'll do a lot of briefing training and things like that where you have, uniform on so that we can see what those movements are that you can do. But again, I just think it goes back to what he said is like, how can you train in a way that you can at least fit it in to where you're more mobile so that when you do put on the gear, you're not like fully rigid. You do have that pliability. But then there are some things that we can do in full uniform that can help you when you're out on the streets to help maintain that. So you're not just going from cold to hot, or excuse me. Yeah, cold to hot.
Yeah, cold hot, exactly. Well, awesome. Thank you both so much, and we're tight on time. I would love to go more and more, and we probably will have to another time. But if there's anything, please, that you want to close with for the listeners, and again, where they can find you, the links will be in the show notes. But Anthony, let's start with you.
Um, yeah, I mean, like we didn't talk as much about the mental health side of it, but like that is if you're physically healthy, like the path to mental health is way easier, right? So
Hmm.
that you can't separate the two, and it is the literally if to say to say that you care about mental health but you're not focused on your physical health, then you don't care about your mental health, right? So like there's a million different ways to get in better shape, and like just start moving and seek help. It's okay to ask for help, and it's really not as difficult. It's not as difficult as you think it is. Like it doesn't take much to get moving. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I love it. Start somewhere. I absolutely believe it has to be a pillar. That's a lot of what I found in my own life, and then I see it. I mean, we see a lot of examples of that. So thank you, Anthony. And Paige, how about you?
I honestly was thinking in the same realms of, of course we talked about it, like consistency over motivation,
Mm,
dedication over motivation always. Um, the more you train hard things, the more you're able to do hard things and they don't feel as hard. And when it comes to mental health, I think there's two aspects of what we're looking at. One is mental resiliency, and that's more of that proactive. So you can train mental resiliency through physical fitness. There's tons of things that you can do independently that are going to help with training your brain, it's almost like you're training a muscle. Your brain's not a muscle, but it acts like a muscle. The stronger, or the more you train it, the stronger it gets, right? And then on the flip to it, the more reactive part is the stress management. And so how can we regulate the nervous system and offload some of the things that you do experience? Because we know that it's not if, it's when, and it's how frequent and how severe in the first responder community. So how can we be more proactive and reactive with mental wellness as well? So
Yeah.
I appreciate your time. I appreciate you guys having me on here. I know I said this before, but I was nervous coming on with you guys. So I appreciate you making this easy for me. And I thought it was a great conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And clearly we have a lot more that we could talk about. I almost regret like bringing up these huge conversations at the very beginning, and then we like barely nudged one of them. But yeah, all to say it is all interrelated. It's all critically important. So share it out and go find Paige's content, Anthony's page as well. And take care, everyone. Hey, Grit Nation, I got a couple things I'm really excited to share with you. The first is that the newsletter, free newsletter, is now live. All you got to do is go to bluegritwellness.com to subscribe. It is basically a summary of everything good and gritty for the week, including some exclusive content specifically on the newsletter. That'll include wellness information, nutrition, things that you ask, Q&A, as well as updates about Blue Grit, offerings, news, things that'll help you out. Next order of business. For years, I've been asked what kind of nutritional supplements I use because I've been into learning about health, nutrition, fitness for so long. And for years, I landed on NutriCost. And it's only a recent thing that I've been an affiliate, but now I get to pass the savings on to you. So if you go to NutriCost.com, use code BlueGrit, that's just BlueGrit, you get 10% off. Literally just a couple items, you get free shipping. And the reason why I found it was because it was always the best quality for the best value. So I always recommend people look at the ingredient list, look out for things like sucralose. It has the lowest amount of unnatural ingredients if you're looking for that kind of thing, whether it's your whey protein isolate, which I toggle on and off of, or organic vegan protein to cut down on different chemicals that I just generally like to avoid. It's not just protein, it's creatine and minerals, vitamins, things like L-theanine and magnesium, which I use regularly to help my nervous system power down. It aids rest and recovery, promoting better sleep. So whatever it is, go to NutriCost.com and you can just enter the code BlueGrit to get your 10% off. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.